Welcome everyone to the third first lecture of the third series, our third series of Graeco-Aegyptiaca talks. And today we're very fortunate to have with us Professor Christopher Faraone. He's a distinguished service professor at the University of Chicago. He's published countless articles on a whole variety of themes. He's published 5 books, one on Greek sculpture, on Greek love magic, Greek elegy. He's most recently published 2 volumes, one called The Transformation of Greek Amulets in Roman Imperial Times, that's University of Pennsylvania Press, 2019, and Hexametrical Genres from Homer to Theocritus, Oxford University Press, 2021. He's published numerous edited volumes as well, including my absolute favorite, Masks of Dionysus with Thomas Carpenter, which I'm always referring to in my work. And he's currently engaged in a project to co-edit a new edition of the Greek magical formularies, and has also published recently with other collaborators a lot of work on ancient curse tablets. And today we're going to hear him talk about magic, one of his great concerns. The title of his paper is "The Transfer of Circular Designs in Egyptian Images from Magical Gems to Late-Antique Thunderstones." So I welcome Chris, and please give us your talk. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Peter, I've lost the. Can you see my PowerPoint?
I can, yes.
But
Yes.
I can't see it on my screen. Something happened. Can you guide me to get it back so I know where I am?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest thing for me to do would be to make you a co-host, and then you should be able to see everything. Sorry.
It's something. I'm sure it's something I did, but
Yeah, I don't know. Just a second. We'll figure it out. Yeah, maybe you can try sharing again.
sure. So I'll stop it. Oh, I see. Your screen sharing has paused. Stop share.
Yeah, let's start
And
again.
start again. There. Share. There we go.
Now you can see it.
Yes. Let me go
Excellent.
back
Okay,
to the
that's
beginning.
great.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, first I'd like to thank Arpad and Kata and Peter for inviting me. I also want to say that this is part of a project, a book I'm writing called The Lost Magical Handbooks of the Roman Empire, and I'm giving this this book as a series of lectures at Oberlin College at the Martin Lectures in March of next year. So let me begin. Oops. In the Roman and late antique periods, people occasionally found Stone Age axe heads like this one, also known as thunderstones, and they reused them as protective amulets. The larger ones were hung up in buildings, and the smaller ones were hung around the neck of individual human bodies. In about a dozen cases, they were inscribed with text and/or images to enhance their alleged power to fight off lightning strikes or the terrible fires that resulted from them. In the past, scholars, myself included, have focused primarily on the texts that were etched upon them without paying enough attention, I think, to their images or to their overall designs, and without asking where such images and designs may have come from. A few years ago, I published an article arguing that in the late 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the designs that gem cutters used for producing magical gems in the previous centuries began to be copied onto amulets of more easily worked material like silver foil or papyri. Such a transition, in fact, made sense of some of the oval and round designs that we sometimes find on rectangular media. For example, this gold lamella that dates to the 2nd century CE and was found in the ruins of a Roman villa in Latium. In the center, we see a short-haired man who stands naked and holds 3 poppies in his left hand and a knife in his right, while a snake entwines itself upwards around his body. Although the gold lamella is itself roughly rectangular in shape, as are most foil and papyrus amulets, why is the figure framed by a carefully inscribed oval? along whose inner edge are inscribed three well-known magical words. This image, I argued, is not just a representation of a man and a snake, but rather it is a representation of an oval object, indeed a magical gem, engraved with a man and a snake and some magical names. Such transfers are even more numerous in the case of circular designs like these. Today, however, I will argue along the same lines that these designs I will argue along the same lines that the designs used on 4 of these thunderstones were also copied from gems, all of which show obvious Egyptian influence, either in their images or in their use of transliterated epithets of the Egyptian gods. That gems are the source of these images will be especially clear in those cases where artisans engraved the images are most clear when artisans copy the square or circular boundary of the original gem onto an axe head that is itself neither square nor circular in shape, or when they carve 2 different images side by side on the same thunderstone. But before we begin, a few words about thunderstones themselves, which are, as I said, axe heads, which were originally shaped in the Neolithic age from stones that were so hard that they persist in the environment for millennia to come. In classical antiquity, they were from time to time recovered and highly valued because they were thought to have some special power to protect buildings and people from lightning. At least 10 of these prehistoric axe heads were found in the Roman East and carry Greek inscriptions, symbols or images that confirm their use as amulets in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, as does Timotheus of Gaza, a 5th century author who tells us quite explicitly that you will have an amulet, a periapton, against a thunder blast if you inscribe a thunderstone with the letters Aphia Afrux and keep it at your house. Our first example of a design borrowed from a magical gemstone is this thunderstone purchased in Athens, but said to come from Ephesus. Scholars have long noted that the image in the center of this design depicts the so-called pantheistic or polymorphic deity, an Egyptian god who was not archaeologically attested until the 1st millennium BCE, when he appears in the form of small-scale statues of bronze or faience, and who appears on the back of many of the so-called Horus stellae that were inscribed with healing incantations, as we can see at the rear of the famous Metternich stela in New York. In the Roman imperial period, this image appears on at least 120 magical gems, many of which are engraved with the same types of unusual stones that were used by Neolithic men to make axe heads, for example, steatite or serpentine. From what source, then, did the engraver of the Ephesus thunderstone borrow this image? Did he simply copy it directly from an Egyptian stele, a handful of which have indeed found their way as far west as Pompeii? The compact presentation of both image and text on the Ephesian axe head suggests, in fact, that the artisan copied it from a pattern book for making gems or from a gem in his possession. The Pantheos figure survives in several different types of magical gems. They're usually oval and have the image of the Pantheos on the obverse, and on the reverse magical names and or a request of some sort, as we see on this lapis lazuli gem that has a long list of magical names ending with Abrasax on the bevel, or this large green jasper in Paris that has as well as several other larger gems in the British Museum that depict this pantheistic god in a more complicated scene standing on a rampant lion, which in turn stands upon a tabula ansata, within which are inscribed versions of the plea, protect from evil. There are some obvious similarities between the design of these gems and the Ephesian thunderstone. Both gems fill up the blank space on the gem with magical words or nonsense letters, and the gems with the lion are generally used for protection, which, as was mentioned earlier, seems to be the general use of thunderstones. In the case of the Ephesian axe head, there is no inscribed request for protection, but the artisan did fill up the space within the Ouroboros with magical names. We see at the god's feet, for example, the palindrome Ablanathanalba and the name Damnameneo. And at his side, we see two other popular magical names. And on either side of his neck and throat, we see first the 7 vowels arranged. We see Jewish names and titles, first 7 vowels rearranged so that they begin with Yao, which means Yahweh, and then Sabaoth and Adonai, of the sort that frequently show up on gemstones and other amulets of the Roman period. At first glance, then, there seems to be some general similarities between the pantheistic gems and the design engraved on the Ephesian thunderstone, but there are other features to consider. To begin with, the Ephesian design has a square or rectangular shape, which is quite rare for magical gems of the Roman period and usually limited to traditional Egyptian designs, as Campbell Bonner noted long ago, for example, a series that depicts Isis nursing Horus on the obverse and Bes on the reverse. In the case of the Ephesian thunderstone, however, the enclosed squarish design needs some explanation. Because on the wider expanse of the blade, the engraver, instead of cramming all of the divine names inside of the Ouroboros, could have easily listed all the names in the empty space below. As another scribe did on a thunderstone found in the ruins of Herculaneum in the 19th century, which was indeed inscribed with a series of divine and magical names. All but 3 of these names, these are marked with an asterisk, also appear on the Ephesian stone. Oops, so sorry. Yao, Ablanathanalba, Sabaoth, Adonai, etc. And the 7 vowels, and then Sesengen Bar Farangen. As it turns out, a small minority of these pantheist gemstones do have a rectilinear shape, such as these 2 lapis gems in the British Museum, one of which is missing its bottom half. Another odd feature of the Ephesian design is that the Ouroboros roughly traces the rectangular boundary of the design. The Ouroboros head, moreover, bites its tail on the bottom of the design, not on the top, which is usually the case on other magical gems. The pantheistic god is, in fact, almost never surrounded by an Ouroboros, although the rectangular Ouroboros does, in fact, appear frequently below the feet of the god. The head of this Ouroboros, moreover, always bites its tail at the bottom of the design, not at the top. The Ephesian artisan, in short, or the handbook he was using, keeps the shape and design of the pantheistic versions found on the rectangular gems, but he also adapts it by removing the animals that normally fill the narrow Ouroboros at the bottom and reconfiguring the Ouroboros itself as a more expansive frame for the entire design. Most notable is the fact that he also leaves the head of the snake at the bottom of the rectangle. The extant rectangular gems do not, however, have magical words filling up the space around the deity, as we see on the Ephesian design. Instead, such names appear on the reverse of these gems, as we saw them, for example, at the lapis gem in London, which has no text on the obverse, but on the reverse. To sum up, then, the person who created the design etched on the Ephesus axe head seems to have adapted the rectilinear depiction of the pantheistic god, but he did not copy this model slavishly, choosing instead to remove the animals enclosed at the bottom by the Ouroboros and to use the Ouroboros instead as a frame for the entire scene. As for the magical words, instead of inscribing them elsewhere on the axe head, he placed them within the Ouroboros frame as well. Our second example of designs borrowed from magical gems is this large axe head now in Athens, but said to come from Argos. It is of a hard stone of green color, probably serpentine, and in Roman times, one side of it was engraved with 2 scenes, the only thunderstone to have more than 1 scene on the same side. On the lower half, we see the standing figures of what has been described as Athena and Zeus in a vignette from a gigantomachy like the famous one on the altar of Zeus at Pergamon. The goddess is about to stab a tiny snake-footed giant with her spear, while her father simply looks on, holding a scepter topped by an eagle, his typical attribute. It goes without saying that this scene is quite odd. It is usually the case, for example, that the giants in a gigantomachy are depicted at the same size as the gods, as we can see here in this relief from Aphrodisias of Athena and two giants. Zeus himself, moreover, is always bearded, uh, unlike the youthful and clean-shaven person on this thunderstone, and he always appears in the gigantomachy with a thunderbolt, which would have been a perfect attribute for him on a thunderstone. Instead, this Zeus holds a wilted Ankh sign in his left hand, and Athena holds or supports, supports her left hand a tall ribbed rikton that, according to Delat and Mastrocinque, resembles an Egyptian type. I know of no similar scene on a magical gem, but I am mentioning it in hope that someone in the audience might have an idea about where it came from. I should add in passing that I do not think that the short serpent-footed person in the center is the anguipid, because he is usually a protective and helpful figure on amuletic gems. But I could be wrong, and I welcome some advice. Regarding the upper register, however, our work gets much easier because we find a simplified version of the well-known Mithraic icon. The god kneels on the back of the bull and stabs it while three animals surround and attack it from the side or below: a bird, a snake, and below to the left, a rather pitiful-looking dog. This Mithraic scene is encircled by two magical words, magical names, Bakazihuch and Pavaferes. The first often appears alone on gemstones and transliterates the Egyptian phrase, sun or soul of darkness, even though it is sometimes used paradoxically to describe solar deities like Mithras in this scene. The second word has yet to be fully deciphered. Vermesseren collected 11 examples of this Mithraic scene on gems, 4 of which carry on their reverse side magical words or inscriptions that confirm they were used as amulets. I suspect that a magical gem inspired this upper scene on the Argive Thunderstone. Because magical gems never show the Mithraic scene surrounded by words, we might assume that the image and the text were kept apart on the original two-sided gem, as we see here in this example, two of the examples collected by Vermesseren, which have the scene on one side, but the magical name on the reverse. In later antiquity, gem cutters often surrounded images with text, and this practice also seems to have been transferred to foil amulets, as we saw earlier on this gold amulet, gold foil amulet from Latium. But it is also the case that in handbooks, scribes seem to have framed gem images with text that were meant to be inscribed on the back of the image, as we can see in this amazing bronze plaque that was found in Egypt and has been dated to the 8th century CE because of the Arabic inscription in the upper left corner. I have argued, in fact, that despite its late date, it preserves a tradition of models used in the Roman period by gem cutters or scribes who later transferred these designs to foil or papyrus. As you can see, the plaque is engraved with 6 images, 5 of them encircled by Greek letters and symbols. And in 4 of these cases, we can show that they can combine images and text that were traditionally kept apart on opposite sides of a gem. I only have time to show you one example that Arpad himself pointed out a number of years ago, the design of a gem used for diseases of the eye. These gems almost always have a lizard on the front with Greek letters at its 4 legs, as you can see in this blurry scan of a gem in the Getty. And the inscription Cantes Sule on the back, a design that appears on the bronze plaque in this roughly drawn lizard with a crescent moon at its head and the 4 letters at its feet. It is surrounded by a corrupt version of the magical name, Sule, that usually appears on the reverse of the gem. I suggest, therefore, that the artisan who inscribed the Mithraic scene may have got his inspiration from a gem with the scene on one side and the name on the other. What then was the purpose of the argived thunderstone? The parallelism between the two scenes is noteworthy. In both cases, powerful gods, Mithras and Athena, stab at dangerous adversaries, a bull and a snake-footed giant. Because this object is unique, it is difficult to say what it was used for, but the parallel scenes of divine triumph suggest that it too was a protective amulet. The orientation of the design suggests, moreover, that the axe head was positioned with its cutting edge pointed downwards, that is, in the opposite direction of the Ephesian stone. The back of this axe head is also left uninscribed. Our third example is perhaps the most familiar because it belongs to one of the most famous caches of late Roman magical texts, objects, the so-called sorcerer's kit from Pergamon, a collection of about a dozen magical implements, most of them bronze and inscribed with magical words or symbols. The kit also included thunderstones. Unlike the axe heads from Ephesus and Argos, these thunderstones are carefully sliced and then inscribed on both sides with different formulas. Here, too, I suggest that the circular designs were originally engraved on gemstones. The wider side of all three slices, you have one example on your right, have the same design. The artisan carefully inscribed, have the same design. The artisan the artisan carefully inscribed the Iao palindrome along the inner side of the circle and then placed within it 10 lines of Greek magical names, 4 lines of symbols, and then 5 more lines of names. Since the names of the 4 angels appear near the beginning of the text, Michael, Gabriel, etc., we expect that all of these other words and symbols also represent powerful supernatural allies. On the narrower side, we find another circle, and within it a different series of magical words and symbols, 3 lines of which are isolated within a parallelogram. The design on this side seems organized around the triple repetition of the words pa, tha, fodza at the start and the end of the inscription and just above the text that is embedded in the parallelogram. These words record in Greek letters yet another Egyptian phrase. This is Ptah, the healthy one. This mixture of Greek magical words and symbols and the appearance of angel names and the acclamation of the Egyptian god Ptah all point, of course, to a Graeco-Egyptian handbook. But the question remains, why did the artisan set these inscriptions in circles? Indeed, he could have easily written them out in larger letters and spread them out over the available space of the axe head, as we saw in the case of the example from Herculaneum. I suggest that here, too, the circles were copied from a handbook recipe for a gemstone, in this case, a circular gemstone with both sides covered with letters and symbols. Or to put it another way, the artisan was not writing text on the thunderstone, he was illustrating the 2 sides of a circular magical gemstone. You can get an idea of the kind of recipe and diagram that produced these circular designs on the Pergamon thunderstones by looking at a recipe from a 4th century handbook that probably came from Upper Egypt near Thebes. Phylactery, a bodyguard against demons, against phantoms, against every sickness and suffering. Let it be written on a gold leaf, a leaf of gold, silver, tin, or on hieratic papyrus. Let the snake be biting its tail. Let the names be inside the snake, and the symbols too in this way, as follows. Then there's 7 symbols. The whole figure is drawn like this, as given below, with the request, thoroughly protect my body and the entire soul of me, so-and-so. And when you have consecrated, wear it. As promised in the recipe, the papyrus also includes this full diagram. Along the periphery, we see another Ouroboros serpent with its head on top, as is usually the case, and in the center, a similar pattern of text, followed by symbols, and then again by text. In this case, the Iao palindrome, a series of symbols that are similar but not identical to those we see in the Pergamon circles, and finally, the request for protection. There are, moreover, a string of letters inscribed in the circle outside of the Ouroboros ring, letters which seem to be a corrupt version of another well-known formula, the Harpan Knufis logos that begins by transliterating the Egyptian name of Horus Knefis. The parallels with the circular designs from Pergamum are therefore three. Within an Ouroboros, rather than a circle, we see the same alternation between nonsense names and symbols. Around the edge, a well-known Greek-Egyptian formula, and the recipe design was destined for a protective amulet, like the thunderstones. Although unlike the Pergamon stones, the request for protection is explicitly inscribed on the amulet itself. Had I the time, I would discuss some other examples of this circular pattern on gems and foil amulets, but we must move on. As was mentioned earlier, a number of inscribed thunderstones are small enough to be worn around the neck, and we have just enough time to talk about one whose Egyptian design also seems to have been copied from a magical gemstone. It is a small polished green axe head in the British Museum that was, however, labeled a post-antique production by Simone Michel, the brilliant editor of the corpus, and I think that Arpad agrees with her in this assessment as well. On one side, we see an image of the mummiform Osiris, and on the reverse, an Ouroboros serpent with the head on top, as usual. That encloses 2 rows of symbols followed by 5 rows of Greek letters. In an earlier article, I argued that the image and the magical names were of Roman date rather than early modern because a number of magical gems have inscriptions that end like the last 2 lines of this final thunderstone, which rendered in Greek, a phrase which has long been noted, transliterates yet another Egyptian acclamation, "You are the Lord of the soul." I do not have time to rehearse those arguments today, but I will add that I recently realized that both sides of this amulet also seem to imitate the 2 sides of a single magical gem of the type we have seen earlier, an image without text on the obverse and its magical names on the reverse. Oops, right there. This seems especially clear in the manner in which the image of Osiris on the obverse and the word surrounded by the Ouroboros on the reverse are curiously dwarfed by the dimensions of the axe head. Here, perhaps most clearly, we can see that an artisan presents us with a drawing of 2 sides of a magical gem. So let me conclude. We have seen that in their desire to augment or enhance the natural power of thunderstones to protect places and peoples, artisans have had 2 approaches. In some cases, like the axe head from Herculaneum, he just inscribed powerful text on one side of it. But where images were involved, most of them seemed to be borrowed directly from the repertoire of designs used on magical gemstones. We saw, for example, how some of these artisans engraved these images in a rather small scale, as you see here, even though the blade of the thunderstone offered them a much greater area of space. There were also the cases where artisans outlined an image in a circle or rectangular boundary that replicated the shape of the gemstone for which it was originally designed, despite the natural shape of the axe head. One question remains, however, why do these thunderstones attract so much Egyptian iconography and so many Egyptian epithets? I'm not sure what the answer could be. Certainly, Egyptian influence on the magical gemstones has often been noted. I would only point out that there is also a significant amount of Jewish influence, not in the realm of imagery, of course, but in the divine names, epithets, and angel names, and probably in the symbols that appear in the center of the circular designs, some of which seem, as Katansky and others have shown, to be connected in late antiquity with the famous seal of Solomon. But that, my friends, would be the start of another lecture. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that fascinating paper. Well, I'm sure people have a lot of questions and suggestions to make. So I'll just open the floor to discussion.
Great. Let me see if I can get rid of the. I can see people. Here we go. There we go. Okay.
So, do we have any questions for Chris? Yes, Suzanne.
Hi, thank you so much for this. Hi, Chris.
Suzanne.
So can you remind me what dates these are? And then that's the one thing. And then the other thing, the question I had was, you're just talking about the Egyptian influence. Like, is it, coded as exotic or foreign, do you think? Even like, in the, not the Egyptian, but the Egyptian next to the Greek do you think like it's that combination that's what the magic, it's like this, synthesis of these two things that are notably different, that is sort of part of this magical coding. Like that's how you code, that this is a magical item as opposed to just another.
Yes, I think that's part of it, especially in the so these are all Roman period. All right, the gemstones are usually dated to the second and third, and then the handbooks that I cited, and most of these thunderstones they usually date them to the third or fourth century. So there's a kind of chronological development. The Greeks clearly thought, Greeks and Romans thought that both Egyptian and Jewish names, in the case of Egyptian, also images, would certainly add power to, especially their amulets. This is, I think, less the case in curse tablets. But certainly it's the exotic appeal, especially in both cases to people who had a long tradition of writing, right? And were thought to be wise in these areas, wise in the areas of ritual and protection.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up to that?
Sure.
So do you think the possessors of these would have been able to recognize that these are different languages or different things, as opposed to just, they look different enough, or would they have been able to read these things, do you think?
Right. So except for the symbols, the text is always in Greek. It's kind of interesting, even when they're found in the West. It's very rare to find an amulet in Latin. But you see, for example, in the middle of this, in the middle of the Pergamon thunderstorm, there's these symbols, right? There's these characteres or symbols. They would have certainly looked strange, all right? We was originally thought that these were adaptations of hieroglyphics, but Richard Gordon and other people now have shown that they're actually adaptations of the Greek alphabet. So there was someone took the Greek alphabet and deformed it, different letters in different ways, so that it would look, in fact, exotic and strange and powerful.
Well, do you want to follow up, Suzanne, or
No, that's great. Thank you. That answer.
It's very interesting. Thank you. We have a colleague from the Egyptological Institute, I think.
Great.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah. I'm just using a different.
Sorry, I didn't recognize you, Joachim.
So you couldn't recognize it from the label. So thank you very much for your presentation. And well, I must admit that I have still some doubts about your dates for some of the objects, most especially the Osirian mummy, because this frontal view of an Osirian mummy looks very much like copied from, so to say, modern depictions of genuine Egyptian objects, not at all like the Osirian mummy was copied in definitely antique objects. So I'm rather skeptical about this early date you propose. And also, I mean, this Pantheos-like figure which you have currently on the slide is a very derivative type in iconography. So there also, I'm a bit skeptic about early dates. And then just one small detail of translation with the Ephesus object with the Paiphtapotza, where you have translated this is Ptah, and where this needs to be corrected just a tiny little bit, because pi can't be the demonstrative pronoun that would not be possible in regular Egyptian word order. Pi is just a writing for pe, very normal, of course, in later orthography, alpha iota for simple e, and it's just the definite article, the ptah. Actually, I commented on this formula in an article several years ago, where I could even demonstrate that there are genuine demotic Egyptian renderings of this expression, which clearly write it like the definite article.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, so Arpad Mikloshnod has put a question in the chat, which I'll read out for you. Thank you, Chris, for this wonderful talk. Is it possible to establish a pattern between the material, the thunderstone, and the iconographic and epigraphic motifs engraved on it, aside from the fact that most of the motifs are Egyptian?
Say that again.
So is it possible to establish a pattern between the material, the thunderstone, and the iconographic and epigraphic material motifs engraved on it, aside from the fact that most of the motifs are Egyptian?
I have traced, yes, it seems to me that several of the Pantheos gems are from the same hard stone. I think I mentioned that. So so I think there's a kind of connection between the image and the material. I think that's what you want. But the problem is, as I mentioned toward the end, that these are just four examples. The number of the database is so small. It's hard to make. I would not make any general connections.
Okay, Arpad, do you want to do you have anything further to say about that?
So not really. It's really complicated, and as Chris pointed out, the database is small, so small, so it's practically difficult, so impossible to make any suggestion. But Chris is the best expert on this topic, so hence my question. No, I have no idea, must admit.
We have another question in the chat. Marie says, many thanks for such an interesting lecture. This later Celtic symbolism of the snake biting its tail as representing eternity transposed to these symbolic these symbolic use, and the framing in circular formats points to their use of spells within a protective circle. So I guess the idea is does the ion snake, or the Ouroboros, does that have a kind of protective magical meaning on these in the iconography?
Well, yeah, it does. It seems to it creates a boundary. So sometimes it keeps bad things out. Sometimes it keeps unruly wombs in. So it's definitely a boundary. That's how it serves. But it's mostly in Greco-Roman magic. It's mostly used in protective magic and never used in curses. So yeah.
Thank you, Amelia Brown.
Oh, yes. Hello, Chris, as well.
Hi, Amalia.
I have to say, I was, thinking about the circular pattern and the hurricanes and thunderstorms. And I do wonder, was there any idea in protective magic that weather was circular, that you had to defend, I mean, not just from weather, but thunder, lightning, any of those sorts of things in a kind of circular way?
I don't think so. And I will say that these thunderstones were used to protect individuals and houses from lightning strikes, but also from the fires that resulted from them, because fire is, in antiquity was a very dangerous thing. So, and there's lots of kind of ethnographic data from Scandinavia and Germany from the late Middle Ages and early modern periods, where they hung them up, especially in barns, right, right in the apex of the building. These are usually not inscribed with anything, or sometimes they have Christian symbolism, but but people also wore them around their bodies. Apparently, they personally felt they didn't want to get struck by lightning. I think that's what I suspect. So, but the upshot is that I don't think storms were per se were the worry. It was actually thunder. I mean, lightning and
lightning and thunder. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. Great paper. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
And I mean, are these objects conceived of, the thunderstones, are they conceived of as being very old, or are they conceived of as the sort of byproducts of Zeus's lightning? I mean, if a Greek person stoops down and picks one up off the ground, what does he think it is?
Well, Pliny has two places where he talks about these, and he says exactly that. They think that in the past, Zeus threw down a thunderbolt, and it was lodged in the ground, and then it was found. And through the power of like banding like, if you have the thunderbolt on your house or around your neck, it would protect you. So that seems to be Pliny's idea of it. It's hard to know what other people thought, but that seems.
Does that have anything to do then? Does maybe the magical force associated with these things have anything to do with the I mean the idea of the sekos, the idea that if a building is struck by lightning, for example, you have to, or a tree, you just have to fence it off because the god has claimed it for himself. So as it were, you're picking up the protective boundary and carrying it with yourself.
Well, it could be, but I kind of like Pliny's idea makes better sense from what we know of these kinds of this idea of like banding like. If you put the face of the Gorgon in front on your shield or on your front door, keep the Gorgon away. More globally, that makes more sense to me than it being sacralized, because it's actually the object that does the sacralization. It's not the subject of it. So
yes, understood. That makes and I suppose that fits into a much broader kind of scheme of magical practice, doesn't it? I mean, it's a basic that's a basic thing. We have there's a question about the magical signs and about where they come from, whether they're what we're dealing with here is basically letters of the Greek alphabet which have been reformed or shaped in particular ways, or whether we're dealing with basically iconographic motifs. So yeah, if you have anything to say for one of our participants about this.
Well, yeah, sure. I would say this. I would say that the way that powerful beings are represented as text on an amulet, there's three ways. One is names that we know, like Yahweh, right, or Mithras or something like that. Then there are names that we as moderns don't know what they mean. They're nonsense, right? To us, they don't make sense to us, but they're pronounceable. So they could also be used. They could be used both in an oral presentation or as text. The thing about symbols is that they only operate as text. You cannot pronounce them, right? So they fall exactly in this realm that they're both artistic devices, right? They're both, but they're also they apparently, I think they had some the owners and makers of these had some sense of them as being names. In my book on amulets, I list about 6 or 7 examples where you have a gold foil and it has one of these magical nonsense names of 12 letters, and then below it there are 12 of these symbols. So it makes it's almost as if these symbols are code, right? They're coded for regular language, but so that's what I would say about them. But it's a very good question.
Thank you, thank you. And we have a question from Regina Mai, again in the chat. Did I see Cupid and Psyche in the comparative material when you explained the argive thunderstone? And could you please explain why they would appear here, given they're usually not protective but linked to erotic magic?
Regina, who say that again?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
I put this in the chat. When you were explaining the argive thunderstones, you had some comparative material there, but you didn't speak about it. But I wasn't quite sure if that was because they were equally protective spells, or whether they were also just used because they were in a like a roundel and on a larger place. But there was Cupid and Psyche there, and that struck me as a little bit unusual in a list of protective spells that you were listing, because in a magical papyri, at least, they seem to be more linked with love magic than anything else.
No, you're absolutely right. So that was the back of one of the Mithras gems.
Oh,
on
okay.
the back of it, there was that there's only half of that gem survives, but that particular gem was clearly used as some kind of love charm.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the Mithraic gems are not all used for protection. I should have made that clearer.
Could I ask, do you happen to know the number for this so I can check it out?
If you email me, I can send you the image, and also it's in the Thorvaldsen Museum in Copenhagen, but I have the number.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have another question from the chat, Dan Dak, who writes, "Hello, wonderful lecture. Did I understand correctly that usually thunderstones are connected to Egyptian deities? If so, could there be a link between Dio Cassius's rain miracle episode, especially given the date of the amulets?"
Well, here too, I would say that they're not weather amulets. They're very specific to thunder, the destructive effects of thunder and lightning, and to the fire that results from lightning. So I don't. It's an interesting idea. I think that would be pushing it too far.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments for Chris?
Maybe we just missed, I think, one question from Yvette, who says, "How many engraved thunderstones have you identified?" You mentioned that the corpus is really small, but how small?
Well, the number of uninscribed ones is quite extraordinary. There was a survey done of Roman sites in Britain, and they found almost 60, none of them with inscriptions. They're usually found associated with buildings, especially baths and kilns, which were liable to blow up, right? Or catch fire. And there's a wonderful set they found in a Roman grave in Germany. They found a leather satchel that had deteriorated. Only the handle remained, but inside of it there were 6 thunderstones. So this was someone who was in the traffic and the commerce of thunderstones. I would say they're very rare. I think there's only now there's only 14 or 15 that are inscribed. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. That was really exciting, and oh, sorry, we have a yeah, thank you, sorry, thank you very much, and I'm yeah, it was a really fascinating paper and fascinating fascinating class of objects. I'm really taken by these, and I'm very grateful that you've taken the time and trouble to show them to us. So thank you very much. In November, towards the end of November, we'll be having the second talk, and we'll inform you of that in good time. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming, and thank you, Chris, for a marvelous paper.